it's January 2016, and we're all gathered here in Dilip Barman's house, and we are gathered to pay tribute to a couple of people that we all know and love, and that's Tom and Nancy Regan. And we all, I think, know that we're very lucky to be living in this area because it's such a unique place to be living because we lived near Tom and Nancy for all these many years, and Tom is so well known all over the world that we've just been in a very lucky position here. And so I think when the annals of the animal rights movement are put together, Tom is probably going to be at the top of the list. And so we've all been able to rub shoulders with him and Nancy, and we're very, lucky for that reason. Nancy is kind of been the woman behind the man, and I don't mean that in kind of in a non-feminist way, but she was always by Tom's side, and she was always right there with him, kind of in the background, but she was just as active in her own way and in her own right, and she didn't just come to her beliefs about animal rights through Tom. She always, this was her own thing. They kind of came to this position together, and then she, of her own right, has been very, very active along with him. So this is a tribute to Tom and Nancy. Mm-hmm. So all of us here are in some way, we've all in some way been connected with Tom and Nancy, and with this event that they put on every year for 25 plus years called the Culture or the Compassionate Living Festival. And it was such a unique event. It brought together people from all over the country, activists, people from all over the world, and they were usually people that were involved some way in the arts. There were dramatists, filmmakers, visual artists, writers, musicians,
poets,
cartoonists, you name it. And cartoonists, Dan Pizarro, from Pizarro was there. But it was just such a unique collection of people, and it was always fabulously fascinating. And so we're grateful to them for doing that. And myself, my name is Rondy Elliot, and I was fortunate and honored to be on the board of the Cultural and Animals Foundation for a number of years, and that was the group that planned this event. But we did the planning, but honestly, the lion's share of the work and the bulk of everything that was done by Tom and Nancy. Everything behind the scenes, all the little things that had to be done, it was Tom and Nancy that did it. Contacting the people who they invited to come to this, and it just a myriad of things. And the Culture and Animals Foundation, which was Tom's group, they mainly gave grants to artists and people whose work they wanted to support that had an animal rights focus. So that's what it was about. So here we all are, and I'm just wanting to pick all of your brains a little bit and ask you to share some things that you remember about Tom and Nancy, things that may have affected you, anything specific that might stand out in your mind for one reason or another.
It's easy for me to share about Tom because I have many memories, and Nancy, of course. I moved here in this area in 1992, and Tom was one of the first persons that I actually got to know. I became a member of the Vegetarian Society, Triangle Vegetarian Society, and Tom was one of the founders of the Vegetarian Society, and so I knew him mostly in the context of the Triangle Vegetarian Society, and I used to go to the wonderful Compassionate Living Festival. It was, as Rondy said, always a wonderful event, excellent speakers, and a really nice vibe. People came from many places to be here in Raleigh and share of their art, their writing, their activism, their passion for animals. That was the thing that tied everybody together. And I met many neat and important... for example, I met Lisa Shapiro, who was another, hero in the animal world. She unfortunately just passed away last year, Lisa Shapiro, and in TVS we've started an annual award for the Lisa Shapiro Activist Award. So I met Lisa through Tom, actually, now that I think about it, at Compassionate Living. And then I remember that one of the things, I do many things poorly, but one thing I do reasonably well is food, and Tom and Nancy knew that, or thought that of me, and so they asked if... I remember that there was a year or two where some people, they loved the conference. They said the conference is really good, but the food, could be better. And so Tom asked me, would you be willing to train the chefs here at the hotel where we're having the conference? And I said, I'd be glad to. And I put together a nice menu and showed the chefs. They did a tasting. I remember Tom, Nancy, and I, there was some sort of a penthouse top-level dining room that we met in, and the chef brought all his food out, and we tweaked it. They weren't used to making all the food that I was talking about. They tweaked it a bit, came out with something pretty good, and that was the Compassionate Living Festival where you had mentioned Martin Rowe, I think, or maybe it was before we started taping. So Martin and I were in line, and I remember talking about the food. So that was one small contribution I was able to make to the festival, and so I did that for a year or two, and I think that was lots of fun. It didn't persist because I think we moved to a different venue where they couldn't use the services. That's one strong recollection. Tom was always very supportive with the Vegetarian Society, of course, and one thing that the Vegetarian Society is known for is our Thanksgiving. It's the country's biggest vegetarian Thanksgiving. You get well over 800 people each year, and Tom and Nancy and their family were always big supporters, and I mean that in the sense that not only would they attend Thanksgiving, but they bought so many raffle tickets when we pull prizes. The next winner of the such and such is Tom and Nancy Regan. This winner is
That's
Tom
why
and
they
Nancy
won.
Regan. So they always bought lots and lots of raffle tickets. And the last time I saw Tom at Thanksgiving was actually last year, which would be 2014, November 2014, at our pre-Thanksgiving at Irregardless, and it was wonderful to see them. But the Regans weren't there this year, and it was such a shame. We really missed them. When I put the Thanksgiving together, he's one of the ones that I think about, and I look to seeing him at his big table, and it was missed this year. So, hoping that at some point we could have the Regans back and continue the Thanksgiving. So those are some of the salient memories I have of.
Yeah, when we think about the fact that Tom and Nancy are here, and the Culture and Animals Foundation was here, and the Compassionate Living Festival was here, and the biggest Thanksgiving, vegetarian Thanksgiving probably in the country.
It is in the country.
It's pretty amazing.
We
Thanks.
really are lucky to be living here, and I'm really glad that we are sharing all this today.
Well, I moved here 30 years ago, and I'd been a vegetarian for many years and a vegan just 5. And so I was looking to find other vegans around out here in the South, and so I found the North Carolina Network for Animals, and I remember watching a film that pretty much eviscerated me at the time. Actually, I still haven't gotten over it. It was the Animals film.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's Earthlings and everything now, but it's like that is etched in my brain. But I remember this charismatic man that was talking, and I mean, he just gave me hope that we could do something about all these horrible things. And it was Tom Regan, and then I learned he was in our area, and we would then come to do things together. We did protests and potlucks, and then worked on the Compassionate Living Fair, and it was just amazing to know these people. They were just such wonderful neighbors, and we were so fortunate to. Excuse me. So then I went on to do farm animal rescue, and it was Tom and Nancy were really my inspiration into animal rights. I was pretty clueless when I got here.
I have, I think, sort of a unique story. In somewhere early 2000s, well, my dad retired from NC State at the same time as Tom Regan did. I believe it was 2001, 2002, something like that. And for some unknown reason, Tom Regan's retirement certificate inadvertently got sent to my parents' house by NC State. Oh. Before I knew anything about animal rights, Tom Regan, although I've always been a huge animal lover and always loved primates, hence my shirt. So I remember my dad explaining to me about Tom Regan and knowing that I would be interested, and I was. And so I gladly took the certificate home because I live in Raleigh. My parents, although my dad was a professor at State, they lived in Durham. My dad commuted. So I took the certificate and I looked them up, called their house. Nancy answered and arranged a time, and I went over and delivered it to him. I delivered it to her. But I then met him. Well, actually, let me back up a little bit. About a year later, I was reading my first animal rights book, The Grade 8 Project. And The Grade 8 Project is a book that has different articles and essays by different people. And Tom Regan has a chapter in there. And when I saw the chapter at first and it said Tom Regan, NC State University, and I'm like, I think that's the same guy my dad was telling me about not that long ago, and I brought his retirement certificate to him. So I obviously read his chapter with a lot of enthusiasm, and I finally met him summer of 2004 at the National Animal Rights Conference. I tried connecting with him a couple times. There were times that he was doing something at NC State, but because of work, I couldn't quite get over there in time to catch him. But I finally did meet up with him there and told him this whole little background story. He only knew bits and pieces. So that sort of gave us kind of a unique connection. And I also feel a unique connection with Nancy because I think back in the day at some point she was a preschool teacher.
Really?
And I'm a preschool special education teacher. So we always had that teacher connection in addition to the passion for animal connection. So, and although I didn't really get active in animal rights till like 2004, so I just kind of got the tail end, the last like 4 or 5 years or so of the Compassionate Living Festival. But those last few years, I did some of that little behind the scenes stuff. Tom or Nancy would email me, could I go to Whole Foods and pick up stuff for breakfast, and some of that background kind of stuff, getting boxes out of their basement or arranging for people to get boxes out of their basement and get them to the hotel. So towards the very end I was helpful with that kind of thing. So, and then I have the other anecdote about his library. Should I say it now or so the other, other than always feeling sort of very proud that if I need to, I can email Tom or be over there. I did actually go over to his place one time, just a time for me to go over and talk to him. And I'll always cherish that time. And he gave me a few of his books. And so I probably spent about maybe an hour over in the living room just talking to him. So that was probably in about maybe 2007, 2008, so towards the end of the Compassionate Living Festival. So I always kind of felt proud I could go to animal rights conferences, and I've been to Tom Regan's house. So that always felt good. And just knowing that, I felt comfortable in sending him an email if I needed to. So another person who was very active, or maybe even headed up the Network for Animals, that sort of came before my time, was Diederik van Hagwitz. He was a professor at Duke, is that correct?
I don't know if he was
No.
ever a
He was
professor.
somehow
I don't think
connected
he
He
was.
was involved with
IBM.
IT somehow.
Yeah.
IT at Duke, not a professor,
Yeah,
but IT at Duke.
information technology.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was not a professor.
Okay, but he was very active with the Network for Animals, and he came to the local animal rights group meetings occasionally as he was getting older, and just a few years before he passed away, he came and said he had both a animal rights book collection and an animal rights video collection, and he was looking to give them away to somebody who could take them and take good care of them and do the right thing with them. So I volunteered to take the video collection, which was a collection of about 100 VHS tapes. Some of them came from specific organizations in defense of animals, PETA, Humane Society. But quite a few of them were tapes that Diederik had put in his VCR, and he taped, a segment of 60 Minutes and a segment of Bill Friday interviewing Tom Regan and that kind of thing. So I had the collection for a number of years at my place, and one other local animal rights person, Brandon Becker, had it for a while. It took up quite a bit of space.
I didn't know that.
Yes, Brandon had it for a little while. And my sister is one of the main reference librarians at NC State, and at one point somehow it came up that, I feel like it's taking up some space in my place, and I did get it. People every now and then I would get an email if somebody wanted it, because we had it posted, the list posted on the TVS website, and also on the local animal rights group, the Humane Carolina website. So every now and then I'd get an email that somebody in the world literally wanted a copy of a tape. So, but when I found out about Tom Regan's Animal Rights Archive at NC State University Libraries, I thought that sounded like a good place. I also was worried about deterioration of the tapes because there were a couple of them that I looked at more than once, and I could tell over the years they were starting to deteriorate. So I emailed Tom to see if he was okay with that, and he thought it was a good idea. And my sister, or him, I can't remember exactly who, gave me the email address of the person in charge of that collection, and I signed over a formal deed in donating that wonderful video collection to the Tom Regan Animal Rights Archive. So I have that sort of unique connection to him also, neither of which would have happened if I didn't live right here.
Exactly. Here, I thought you'd been active way longer than that.
Yeah, no, just really.
I did too.
I went just because when I'm active, I'm like really active. But the very first thing that I did, very primate related, I went to a chimposium out at Central Washington University, and that's where Washoe the chimpanzee lived for quite a number of years. She passed away there under, but all that research was done under Roger Fouts. So
he was in the movie, that one movie, Roger.
Right. So I went, and this chimposium is sort of a 1 day, like a 5-hour event, where you get to sort of meet the chimps, through the glass and hear all about. And of course, they don't do any research there. That the chimpanzees have to be voluntarily willing to participate. So it's up to the graduate students to think up of research projects that are interesting enough that the chimpanzees want to participate, because they were not going to philosophically not force them to do anything. So
That's nice.
Yeah,
That's wonderful.
yeah. So I did that summer of 2003, and it was, and then the following summer, 2004, I went to the Animal Rights Conference in D.C., met Tom Regan, and then found the local animal rights group. So that's kind of my little story and connection to Tom and Nancy, and very dear
Thank
people.
you. Thanks. How about you, Emily?
Well, I met them back in the 80s for sure. We had meetings, and I remember a wonderful picnic out at Eva and Dietrich's Van Hug, which is by the lake there. The little koi pond he had, I believe it was. And I had been a visiting artist, and I suggested that I was going to do a mural. I wanted to do a mural over at our local animal shelter. And Tom said, I think you should write a grant for that. So I wrote several grants, and that was the only grant I got in the full amount. And then I got little bits and pieces of grants. But that summer I spent a big portion of it having volunteers help me do a whole border mural around the dog area. It was a very extensive mural of marshed land, and making it so that people would feel better about entering an animal shelter. So because of the Culture and Animal Foundation, I got to do that and be paid for it. It was my full-time job for a couple months. And also we did a poster to put up everywhere about spaying and neutering. And so that was quite fabulous. Very generous people. And such a fun project. So a serious topic, most certainly, but able to have fun with it and all too. And I felt very supported, and it was so wonderful to find other people with our care and concern, because sometimes it kind of makes you kind of feel alone in this world, so it was a good place to go.
Yeah.
It was so unique that the Cultural and Animals Foundation was such a unique focus to me, to support artists and musicians and so forth, that
Fabulous.
all of which took part in this festival. But during the year, what the board would do, we would sit around and we'd take these grants, like yours, and others, and see what the person was proposing, and then vote on who was going to get the money. So that was kind of interesting. Is one of the things that the board did.
And you're very right that that they have supported artists, but they also supported traditional folks in the vegetarian vegan community. So, for example, I remember that's the first place I met Michael Greger, who's very well known in the vegan community now. Michael Greger of nutritionfacts.org. He's phenomenal.
Well, he was one of the speakers.
Right.
He was one of the speakers.
More than once, probably. Yeah.
Once, I think it was once. It was one of the last
one of the
festivals,
last
and so
ones,
he had him. I believe Howard was the speaker once. Rin
Howard
came
Lyman,
down.
yeah.
Well, of course, Rin
Yeah,
is an artist.
Howard Lyman, yeah.
Well, that reminds me, like when we would be planning these events, we would have a musician, we would have a writer, we would have, a representative from all these things. And Tom says, but, we have to have an in-your-face activist. He called it, every year we had to have he says, who are we going to get for an in-your-face activist? That's what he called people like Paul Watson, Greenpeace. And I remember one time, but I thought that was so cute that in addition to these sort of very erudite artists and cultured people, we had to have somebody that was out there really in your face. And
The old brochures.
I do, yeah. And I was going to tell my little bit about my experience with Tom and Nancy. I saved all the, over the years, all the programs from the cultural, the Compassionate Living Festival.
I always remember that
Here they
blueprinting.
are. And I started in this movement in 1988, and these festivals have been going on for a couple of years at least. At that point, I was a student at the Div School at Duke, and at the Divinity School at Duke, and so I was on my own. I was just studying animal-human relationships because I had seen the film The Animals and was very powerful, and my daughter had seen it. And anyway, I just decided when I was there I was going to do work and find what I could theologically to support this thing. Well, of course, I found tons of stuff, and that became my focus. And so one of the people who worked at the Div School, a good friend of mine, Ted Purcell, said, you need to meet Tom Regan. He says, you really need, and I said, who's Tom Regan? And he says, you need to meet him. He lives in Raleigh. He talked about how Tom walked the walk, never wore leather, always was vegan.
About what year was that? Do you remember?
1988,
Okay.
roughly. Yeah, it was 1988 for sure. It's when I was there. So I go to meet Tom Regan. He and I arranged to have lunch at this restaurant on NC State's campus, and I am so nervous because I'm picturing Tom, who's this famous person, and he's going to be very erudite, and he's going to be very intimidating, and he's going to be very intellectual, and I'm going to feel stupid. And so I meet Tom for lunch and find out he is one of the most down-to-earth people you would ever want to meet. Instantly comfortable. That's the thing about Tom. He was so brilliant and so erudite and so charismatic. I love the word charismatic because that describes him.
And
We had-
kind. And kind.
And kind. Oh yeah,
We had a-
absolutely.
And you would always get your hug, and we would always look forward to our hugs.
Yeah, he was
for a few
But
years.
so I was instantly not intimidated anymore. He wasn't anything like
No.
this snooty professor that I expected to meet.
For a few years, Tom and Nancy hosted a TVS potluck at their house. Were you ever at the?
I
no?
never was there.
I
I think
think I
it was a
was.
little
You were?
before my time.
And so I remember he was very spirited, and he started singing some of the traditional Italian, Irish songs like Danny Boy. Wasn't it called Danny Boy, the famous
He's
Irish?
such an Irish guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was very hot on the piano. It was
Oh,
lots
I
of
didn't
fun.
know he played
Wow.
the piano.
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah.
He and Dietrich never did a duet.
All these years, I
Yeah.
never knew that. Oh my gosh. So,
Well,
but
he sang it. Maybe somebody else played the piano. I thought he played piano, but he sang it for sure.
He's-
Maybe Dietrich played.
No, it was
Dietrich
after
wasn't
Dietrich's
it?
time.
Dietrich was very good piano.
I think Tom was playing piano too.
Yeah. But these festivals, for me, what they did for me every single year, probably for everybody else too, was they energized me about what I was doing. It's kind of like when you work in animal rights, it's such a, it's such a 3 steps forward and 2 back or 4 back or whatever. It's just very discouraging sometimes because you're against the mainstream, and you're always against the mainstream, at least. Yeah, we still are.
Well, it's changing quickly.
It's
though.
changing. Thank goodness. I've
It brought
seen the
together
changes.
so many people. I mean,
Like
from all
Jesus.
over
I
the
was
world.
going to say
ages.
networking was
Yeah,
another
All
Yeah,
ages.
local
thing.
There were
Do
some
you-
very, very young people and some,
But
retired
every year,
people.
it made you realize, why we were out there doing this. It re-energized me to do what I was doing. And my recollections of Tom mostly were that he was so eloquent. I mean, he could get up there and speak, and just you would be hanging on every single word.
You could hear a pencil
and he did
drop.
it all extemporaneously.
He
just
spoke so
had that
clearly and
gift.
articulately.
He was amazing. And he was funny. That was the thing
Yeah.
that I loved about him so much. Was I remember one year he got up and he preceded his talk by showing all these animal rights cartoons, like political cartoons,
Bizarro.
Bizarro and Gary Larson. And he went through like probably 20 of these, flashing them on the screen. And everybody was laughing. You know, the whole place was laughing when we had been dealing for so many days and hours with all this dead serious, sad,
Literally dead.
painful stuff. Yeah. And then he just made everybody relax, and he had such a sense of humor, and just a unique and amazing individual.
You know, as you're saying that, I also was reminded that Tom has been a big influence for me as well. I do a lot of teaching, and so at School of Science and Math, for example, I lead an annual ethics workshop. There are all these topics, environment, abortion, all sorts of topics, anything you think of related to ethics and animal rights. And so I'm the animal rights presenter, and I draw heavily on Tom's work. So I have the kids read two works. One isn't his writing, but it's one he selected from one of his collections from writers of fiction. It's a heartbreaking. The first time I read it, I cried. It's about the disassembling of a primate to find out how they really tick. It was sadistic. It was horrible, and so I had my have my folks read it. And then when I present on animal rights, a lot of my material comes from Tom's ideas. I've shared my presentations with him, and he's liked my summary of how I presented, but it comes from Tom. So he's very much influenced through me a number of people, particularly at the high school
I think
level.
it is a trickle down. I
Yeah.
mean, because he has influenced every one of us, and then every one of us has gone out and done something to, and so this is maybe how it's going to work. You know, Margaret Mead, never underestimate the power of a few people dedicated to a cause. You know,
I never got a chance to tell Tom. It's both a horrible, but in a way a funny story too. So one year there was such a demand for the animal rights track, they brought somebody else. I wish they had asked me, because I could have asked any of you to help me out. I don't know where they got this other presenter from. Had never heard of her. And I think
where was
At
that?
the School of Math and Science?
Yeah.
Oh.
And they bring people from all around the state. And I had never heard of this woman before or since, and I tend to know local animal rights activists, right? And so I have no idea what she presented, but the funny or the sad thing that I've always wanted to tell Tom is at lunch, you know, whenever I go there, I always say, make sure you have good vegan food. I always say, make sure there's some vegan choices, and they always do. So the woman other animal rights presenter, I happened to notice she was eating a dead chicken. And it was like, it's like what a not sequitur. How could you a few minutes earlier present on animal rights and then consume it? So it was so weird. It's funny in a bad way.
Yeah.
So I never told Tom that, but that's.
Oh, wow. Well,
So I try to walk the walk like he does
Absolutely.
too.
yeah.
One thing I think before we end, but I don't know that all of us have said our whole names.
Oh,
So
that's a good idea. Introduce themselves by name. Let's do that.
The Tom and Nancy fan club.
That's right.
I know that.
Well, go ahead, Karen.
I'm Karin Yates.
And I'm Rondy Elliot. I think I did say my name at some point.
And I'm Dilip Barman with Triangle Vegetarian Society.
I'm Emily Weinstein.
And I'm Beth Levine.
And I just wanted to say that Tom was so inspiring, and one of the things that how I got involved in this was through my work at the Div School, and then the Blessing of Animals became part of the Compassionate Living Festival every year. And so it even made it into the program, which I didn't even realize until I got these out today and started looking at them. And then Beth this morning said I was going to initially kind of get a little bit dressed up for this presentation, but Beth said, what about wearing an animal rights shirt? And so I had this wonderful thing from the
A million years ago.
a million years
But how
ago.
come it's not a Tom Regan
And
quote?
it's a great, well, I don't know if they had one. It should be
Let's
a
make
Tom
one.
Regan. But this is Thomas Edison, of all people. As long as we continue to harm animals, we are savages. And indeed we are. Who knew? Thomas Edison. But that's why we're all here.
We're starting to study Thomas Edison in homeschool.
This has been a really wonderful opportunity.
Thank you all for
Yeah.
coming. I would like to thank all of you for responding to my invitation, and coming, and also especially to our videographer today, who amazingly and coincidentally is an animal rights activist in his own right.
Absolutely.
James
yes.
D'Alto is filming this today, and he is vegan and himself an animal rights advocate and activist. So that makes it all come full circle.
Full circle.
And thanks, James.
And thanks especially to Tom and Nancy.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yes.
For all that you've done and continue to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why we're here, Tom and Nancy, to talk about you.
Yeah.
And to thank you.
Absolutely.
To thank you for everything that you've done for the world, and particularly to us locals here who just happened to be living near you.